You owe us $150,000 in back dues, or we're foreclosing on your ranch in 30 days. That's the bomb this woman dropped as she rolled up in her shiny Escalade onto my remote Montana ranch. I'm a Marine vet who scrimped for 20 years to buy this 40-acre paradise with cash, just to ditch HOA hell for good. But nope, here she comes, clipboard in hand, designer boots crunching on my gravel, shoving papers about covenant violations and unpaid association fees. The twist? I never signed, never agreed, never even knew these bogus rules existed. Wild sage scent clashes with her diesel fumes as those meadowlarks go dead quiet. Nature smells a scam when it sees one. She's got that practiced bureaucrat smile, manicured nails tapping her clipboard like she's some kind of rural dictator. What would you do if a suit showed up demanding 6 figures for fake rules? Comment below and tell me where you're from, 'cause what I uncovered about this clipboard Karen, absolutely mind-blowing. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. My name's Jake Thornfield, and at 52, I thought I'd finally figured life out. 20 years in the Marines, followed by freelance electrical work, the kind where you crawl through dusty attics smelling like insulation and sweat. But every job meant another $500 toward freedom. The divorce from Linda hit hard. 20 years of marriage down the drain because I was emotionally unavailable. Maybe she was right. War changes you. But here's what it also taught me. Discipline. While she bought designer purses, I ate ramen and socked away every spare dollar. Military pension plus side jobs, $280,000 in cold, hard cash. My dream was simple: buy land where nobody could tell me what color to paint my mailbox or whether my grass was regulation height. Screw HOAs forever. This Montana ranch was perfect. 1940s farmhouse on 40 acres, 2 hours from Millbrook, population 847. Previous owner Martha Henderson, sweet 82-year-old widow, had lived there 60 years. The kitchen still smelled like decades of coffee and bacon grease when I signed papers, her arthritic hands shaking as she passed me the keys. "You'll love the quiet," she whispered. "Nobody bothers anybody out here." 3 weeks later, enter Vivian Cross. Picture every power-hungry HOA president you've ever hated, squeezed into a $300 Blazer and driving a spotless Escalade. She rolled up my gravel drive like she owned the place, stepping out in designer boots that had clearly never touched actual dirt. "Mr. Thornfield, no pleasantries. I'm Vivian Cross, CEO of High Plains Property Management Solutions. We need to discuss your compliance obligations." I actually laughed. "Lady, I bought out here specifically to avoid people like you." That's when she pulled out the clipboard. This thing was her holy scripture. Laminated documents, color-coded tabs, thick as a phone book. She handled it like nuclear launch codes. "Your property falls under the Greater Millbrook Rural Covenant Association. You owe $150,000, $50,000 joining fee, plus $2,500 yearly for 40 years of back dues." The audacity punched me in the gut. Back dues? I wasn't even living here. Her smile could freeze hell. "Ignorance doesn't void legal obligations. These debts run with the land." She thrust a 47-page packet at me, denser than my discharge papers. Every page screamed community standards and architectural guidelines for infrastructure I couldn't see, overseen by boards that didn't exist, enforcing rules I'd never signed. The penalty structure was designed to destroy you. $500 monthly late fees, $5,000 lien costs, daily compounding interest. Miss payments, foreclosure. Want to appeal? Good luck. No governance structure listed anywhere. 30 days, she said, climbing back into her pristine SUV. Then we file liens. I suggest you take this seriously. We've successfully collected from several other properties recently. But here's where Vivian made her first mistake. As she backed out, her bumper clipped my mailbox, the one I'd just installed myself. Didn't stop, didn't apologize, just drove off, leaving my brand new mailbox bent and her license plate clearly visible on my security camera. That night in Martha's kitchen, I spread those documents across the scratched wooden table. The beer tasted bitter as I read through page after page of legal gibberish. But my electrical training taught me to look for what doesn't belong in a circuit, and something here was definitely wrong. Despite 47 pages of established community standards, there wasn't a single actual property owner's signature anywhere. Not one. Every authorization came from the same source. High Plains Property Management Solutions, acting under authority of the 1987 Greater Millbrook Rural Covenant. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. Vivian's company, incorporated 3 years ago, the mysterious 1987 Covenant. filed as a blanket easement with no individual property owner notifications required. My combat instincts kicked in. This wasn't just bureaucratic overreach, this was a con game, and I was about to become the mark who fought back. Vivian didn't waste time. 4 days after our little meet and greet, she was back, but this time she brought an army. I was welding a gate hinge in my workshop when I heard vehicles crunching up the gravel drive. Through the sparks and the acrid smell of hot metal, I watched 3 trucks pull up. Vivian's Escalade, a county inspection van, and a surveyor's pickup with equipment strapped to the back. "Mr. Thornfield," Vivian called out, clipboard already in hand like some kind of bureaucratic weapon. "We're here for the compliance inspection." Behind her stood Carl Benson, county code inspector, guy I'd shared coffee with at the hardware store just last week. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, shifting his weight and avoiding eye contact. The surveyor, some nervous kid with expensive equipment, was already unloading his gear. "Compliance with what?" I asked, pulling off my welding mask. Vivian's smile could cut glass. "Your workshop violates Section 12B of the Architectural Guidelines. Unpermitted metal structures require immediate remediation or removal." Carl cleared his throat. "Jake, I'm sorry about this, but there's been a complaint filed. I have to take a look. Here's the thing about my workshop. It was built 15 years ago by Martha's late husband, fully permitted, all paperwork filed correctly. I had the documentation in my filing cabinet. But Carl went through the motions anyway, measuring, photographing, making notes while Vivian hovered like a vulture circling roadkill. Structure appears grandfathered, Carl finally admitted. Original permits are valid. Vivian's expression didn't change. Nevertheless, the association has ongoing compliance concerns. We'll be monitoring the situation closely. The kid surveyor was setting up his transit, taking measurements along my property line. "Ma'am," he said to Vivian, "the boundary markers don't match your map. This workshop is definitely on his property." "Double-check your calculations," she snapped. That afternoon, after they left, I drove straight to the county courthouse in Millbrook. The building smelled like old paper and decades of bureaucratic despair, all cracked linoleum floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps. I found the records department in the basement, a maze of filing cabinets watched over by Betty Martin, 67 years old and tougher than Marine Corps boot leather. "Jake Thornfield," I said, "need to see all records on my property, 40 acres on Old Mill Road." Betty's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Heard you had some visitors today. Vivian Cross been bothering you too?" "Two?" She lowered her voice, glancing around the empty basement. "She's been filing these covenant claims all over the county. Started about 6 months ago, always the same story. Mysterious 1987 agreements nobody remembers signing." Betty pulled my file, a thick folder with deeds dating back to 1923. We spread everything on her desk under the harsh fluorescent light. The original 1987 document was there, but something made my gut clench. It was filed as a simple blanket easement for road maintenance, not a property management covenant, just a 2-page agreement about gravel road upkeep, signed by the county commissioner. I remembered from my contractor licensing classes that there's a huge legal difference between a blanket easement, which gives specific limited rights like road access, and a covenant running with the land, which requires individual property owner signatures and specific language about successors and assigns. This document had neither. "That's weird," Betty muttered, comparing documents. "This doesn't match what Vivian's been showing people." Then Betty pulled up the digital records on her computer, the same 1987 document, but now it was 23 pages long and mentioned High Plains Property Management as the enforcement authority. "That's impossible," Betty whispered, her face going pale. Vivian's company didn't exist in 1987. I remember when she filed incorporation papers 3 years ago. My blood ran cold. Someone had altered the digital records, but the original paper files told the real story. Driving home, my phone started buzzing. Anonymous callers reporting my unpermitted structures to every agency they could think of. By dinner time, I'd fielded calls from code enforcement, fire inspection, health department, and environmental services. Each inspector who showed up over the next week found minor issues requiring expensive fixes. A fire extinguisher mounted 2 inches too low, a missing permit sticker, improper electrical outlet spacing in my bathroom, death by 1,000 paper cuts. That evening, sitting on my porch with a beer, listening to coyotes howling their warnings across the prairie, my security camera revealed something interesting. Vivian's Escalade had driven past my property 3 times that day, someone in the passenger seat taking photos. I Googled Vivian Cross High Plains Property Management and found their slick website, professional photos, glowing testimonials about protecting rural property values, and a client list that included 3 other properties within 10 miles of mine. The pattern was crystal clear, but what I discovered about those other clients would change everything. 24 hours later, Vivian dropped the legal hammer. A certified letter arrived from Morrison, Hayes, and Associates, some fancy law firm 3 hours away in Billings with letterhead that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. The message was crystal clear. Pay $150,000 in 10 days or face immediate foreclosure proceedings. But here's what really got my blood boiling. Attached were 8 pages of glossy photos showing my property with supposed violations, circled in bright red marker. My workshop, my truck parked on my own driveway, even my damn mailbox that Vivian had damaged herself. Each photo had timestamps and GPS coordinates like I was some kind of criminal under surveillance. The smell of expensive paper and legal threats filled my kitchen as I read their demands. They wanted everything: back dues, late fees, legal costs, plus something called compliance enforcement charges that would have made a loan shark blush. I called Bill Reeves, the only lawyer in Millbrook who didn't charge city prices. Found him at Murphy's Bar at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, nursing bourbon and reading a fishing magazine. Bill's 68, talks like he's still practicing law in 1975, and has the kind of plain-spoken honesty you only find in small-town attorneys who've seen every scam twice. "They're running a shakedown operation," Bill said after reviewing the documents, his weathered hands steady despite the bourbon. "But proving it in court? That's expensive as hell, son. Legal fees to fight this properly would run you $25,000 minimum, and there's no guarantee you'd win." He leaned back in his creaky bar stool, the smell of old beer and cigarettes clinging to everything. "Had a similar case up in Wyoming last year. Landowner fought for 2 years, spent $40,000 in legal fees, and still lost his property. These people know how to work the system." That same afternoon, Vivian started her social pressure campaign. She began appearing at local businesses, the diner, the hardware store, even the damn post office, spreading her poison like some kind of rural gossip terrorist. "He's one of those difficult types," I overheard her telling Margie at the diner, her voice carrying that fake concern that sounds sympathetic but cuts like a knife. "Military background, you know. Sometimes they have trouble adjusting to community standards." The implications were clear. I was the unstable veteran, the outsider who couldn't follow simple rules. Never mind that I'd been nothing but polite to everyone in town, helped jumpstart 3 cars at the grocery store, and fixed Mrs. Patterson's porch light for free. By Friday, the bank manager was asking pointed questions about my loan status, except I didn't have a loan. I'd bought the place cash. When I pointed this out, he got flustered and mumbled something about routine inquiries and community concerns. That weekend, I did what Marines do best: reconnaissance. I drove to Murphy's Bar Saturday night when the locals gathered, ordered a beer, and listened. Took 3 hours and 4 Budweisers, but I finally connected with the other victims. Tom Richards, 71, owned 80 acres east of town. Vivian had hit him for $200,000, claiming his property violated watershed protection covenants. Tom's wife was already talking about selling their retirement dream to pay the extortion. Sarah Chen, a young teacher who'd inherited her grandmother's cabin, owed $75,000 according to Vivian's calculations. She'd already borrowed against her 401k to make partial payments, terrified of losing the only thing her family had left. The pattern was surgical in its precision: isolated properties, recent ownership changes, owners unfamiliar with local politics. Combined, Vivian's demands totaled over $500,000 across 4 properties. If she collected even half, she'd control significant rural acreage and have a war chest to expand her operation. But Vivian was getting desperate. My phone service mysteriously got canceled. Computer error, they said. The propane delivery truck suddenly couldn't find my address, leaving me with an empty tank and no hot water. The county road grader accidentally blocked my driveway with a debris pile that took me 6 hours to clear with a shovel in pure spite. Then someone called the state tax assessor, claiming my property was undervalued by $100,000. If they reassessed, my property taxes would triple overnight. The dirty tricks were escalating, but I was learning too. Those contractor licensing classes I'd taken during deployment taught me more than electrical codes. They'd covered property law basics. I spent every evening in the county law library, a musty room above the courthouse that smelled like old books and broken dreams. That's when I found the smoking gun. Montana Statute 7017-203 requires individual notification to every property owner before any covenant can legally run with the land. Not only had Vivian never provided proper notification, but her entire 1987 document was missing the crucial legal language about successors and assigns that would make it binding on future owners. But what I discovered next made my hands shake as I read. Vivian's company had taken out massive loans using future covenant collections as collateral. Bank documents showed she'd already counted my $150,000 as accounts receivable on her balance sheet. She wasn't just running a scam. She was leveraged to the hilt, and if she couldn't collect, her whole operation would collapse. Monday morning brought Vivian's most brazen move yet. She showed up with a sheriff's deputy for a welfare check. I was drinking coffee on my porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains purple and gold, when the patrol car followed her Escalade up my drive. Deputy Martinez stepped out looking uncomfortable as hell, adjusting his duty belt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Mr. Thornfield," he said, clearly rehearsing words he didn't believe. "We received reports of erratic behavior and potential weapons stockpiling. Mind if we take a look around?" I knew Martinez from the VFW. Good kid. Served 2 tours in Iraq before coming home to wear a badge. The embarrassment on his face told me everything I needed to know about who'd made those reports. "You got a warrant?" I asked, staying calm. "No, sir, but then we're done here." I turned to Vivian, who was recording everything on her phone. "But thanks for the visit. Always nice to see how tax dollars get wasted on false complaints." Martinez nodded apologetically and left, but the message was clear. Vivian could weaponize law enforcement whenever she wanted. The woman had no shame and apparently no limits. That afternoon, I started my own documentation campaign. Montana's a single-party consent state for recording, something I'd learned during my contractor days dealing with difficult clients. Every phone call, every interaction, every threat went into my growing evidence file. I also reached out to the other victims Tom and Sarah had mentioned. What I found made my stomach turn. Margaret Foster, 78, lived alone on 20 acres her late husband had bought in 1962. Vivian had threatened her with nursing home placement if she didn't pay $125,000 in back dues. The old woman was so terrified she'd stopped leaving her house, living on canned soup and crackers rather than drive to town where she might encounter Vivian. This wasn't just fraud, it was elder abuse. But Vivian was just getting started with her smear campaign. Anonymous flyers appeared around town overnight, printed on expensive paper with my photo and warnings about the dangerous hermit living outside town. Social media posts popped up claiming I'd threatened local families, complete with fake testimonials from concerned neighbors. The final straw came when Vivian showed up at the monthly town council meeting, requesting official intervention for what she called a public safety concern. I watched from the back row as she painted me as an unstable veteran hoarding weapons and threatening the community. Her performance was Academy Award worthy, concerned citizen protecting innocent families from the scary outsider. "We have documented evidence of aggressive behavior," she told the council, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Multiple complaints from neighbors about intimidating conduct. I fear for the safety of families in the area." Council members shifted uncomfortably. They knew me from around town, but Vivian's presentation was slick, professional, and convincing. She had charts, photographs, even a PowerPoint presentation that must have cost thousands. That's when I stood up. "May I respond to these allegations?" The room went dead quiet. Mayor Peterson, a decent man who'd run the hardware store for 30 years, nodded reluctantly. "I'm Jake Thornfield," I said, my voice carrying the authority of 2 decades wearing a uniform. "I'm the dangerous hermit you've been hearing about. I'd like to invite anyone here to visit my property anytime. See these alleged weapons stockpiles and judge my character for yourselves." I pulled out my phone and played the recording of Vivian's first visit. Her demands, her threats, her complete lack of evidence for any legitimate covenant. The room erupted in whispers. "Mrs. Cross claims I owe $150,000 for agreements I never signed on property I bought free and clear. She's made similar demands to 4 other property owners totaling over $500,000. Anyone here remember signing these 1987 covenants she keeps talking about?" Silence. Even the council members were looking at Vivian with new suspicion. But Vivian had one more card to play. During the break, I overheard her on the phone. "No, we need to accelerate the timeline. File the liens tomorrow, all of them, and contact our people about the adverse possession surveys." Adverse possession. That's when someone tries to claim ownership of land by occupying it openly for a specific period. In Montana, that's 5 years of continuous occupation. My blood ran cold as pieces clicked together. Vivian wasn't just after money. She was planning to physically occupy portions of our properties. Those midnight visits my security cameras had captured weren't just harassment. She was documenting occupation attempts. I called Sarah Chen that night, the investigative journalist from Helena I'd found online. She'd been following similar cases across 3 western states and was eager to dig deeper. "What you're describing fits a pattern we're seeing," Sarah said, her voice sharp with professional interest. "Rural land fraud targeting isolated properties. The federal government's been tracking this for months." She agreed to drive down the next morning with a camera crew, but I had a feeling Vivian wouldn't wait for media attention. Her desperation was showing, and desperate people make dangerous decisions. That night, my motion sensors triggered at 2 a.m. Through my security system, I watched 2 figures placing survey stakes on my property boundaries. The audio picked up voices discussing possession timelines and documentation requirements. Vivian was making her final play. The next morning, while Sarah Chen drove down from Helena with her camera crew, I did what any good Marine does when facing enemy contact. I dug deeper into the intelligence. Back in that musty courthouse basement, Betty Martin had become my unofficial ally. She'd been thinking about our conversation all week, and when I showed up Tuesday morning with coffee and donuts, she had news. "Jake, I've been going through those old files again," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Something's been bothering me about that 1987 document." She spread the papers across her desk under the harsh fluorescent light, pointing to the original filing with a trembling finger. "Look at this signature, County Commissioner Robert Hayes, dated March 15, 1987. I looked closer. The signature was neat, flowing, confident. "Now look at this," Betty said, pulling out another document from 1987, a routine road repair authorization signed by the same commissioner just 2 months later. My blood went cold. The signatures were completely different. Different pen pressure, different letter formation, even different spelling of Robert. One had a clear O, the other looked more like an A. "Robert Hayes died in a car accident in February 1987, Betty whispered, 3 weeks before this covenant was supposedly signed. The room spun as the implications hit me. The entire 1987 document was a forgery. Not just altered, completely fabricated from the ground up, but that wasn't the worst part. Betty pulled up her computer records, fingers flying across the keyboard with surprising speed for someone her age. "I've been tracking when these digital records were updated. Every single one of Vivian's historical covenants was uploaded to our system between January and March 2022. Right after the county digitized the old files," I said, pieces falling into place. "Exactly. And guess whose company got the scanning contract?" She pulled up a county purchase order that made my hand shake. Digital Archive Solutions LLC, owned by Marcus Cross, Vivian's boyfriend. The scope of the fraud was staggering. They hadn't just altered existing documents, they'd created an entire fictional history of property covenants, inserted them into the official county record system, and then used those fabricated documents to extort money from innocent landowners. "Betty, how many properties are we talking about?" Her face went pale as she scrolled through the database. 43 properties across 3 counties. Total fraudulent claims. She paused, calculating. Over $3 million. $3 million. Some victims had already paid partial amounts to avoid litigation, money that was probably long gone. Others, like Margaret Foster, were living in terror of losing everything they'd worked for their entire lives. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a federal crime operating across state lines. Wire fraud, mail fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, document forgery, and probably a dozen other charges I couldn't even pronounce. But here's what really made my blood boil: the personal cost. Tom and Sarah's retirement savings, Margaret's peace of mind, Sarah Chen, the teacher's inheritance, all sacrificed to feed Vivian's greed. I thought about those late-night survey stakes, the adverse possession strategy, the desperate acceleration of her timeline. Vivian knew her digital fraud was vulnerable to discovery. She was switching to physical occupation of our properties. If she could establish even temporary possession, she might be able to muddy the legal waters long enough to complete her scam. The woman was like a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. I called Sarah Chen immediately. "How fast can you get here? And do you have contacts at the FBI? Because what I just found is going to blow this case wide open." As I drove home, one thought kept running through my mind. Vivian had made this personal the moment she targeted elderly victims and tried to destroy my reputation, but now I had the ammunition to fight back. The question was, Would she escalate to physical violence before I could expose her? By Thursday afternoon, my ranch had transformed into something that would make my old Marine CO proud, a full-scale operations center. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with determination as Sarah Chen arrived with her camera crew, followed by Tommy Walsh, a PI who'd saved my ass in Kandahar and was ready to return the favor. "This is bigger than rural Montana," Sarah said, her laptop already humming as she spread documents across my kitchen table like a general planning D-Day. "We've tracked similar operations in Idaho, Wyoming, and Colorado. Same playbook every time. Target isolated properties, fabricate historical covenants, terrorize people into paying." Tommy was setting up surveillance equipment with the precision of someone who'd done this in much more dangerous places. His weathered hands worked fast, adjusting camera angles and testing audio feeds. "Vivian's desperate," he said, checking his long-range lens. "My law enforcement contacts say she's maxed out credit lines, behind on that fancy Escalade, and her company's circling the bankruptcy drain. She needs cash now." Even Bill Reeves had sobered up enough to join our war council, bringing 20 years of small-town legal experience and a surprisingly sharp strategic mind. "We hit her on multiple fronts simultaneously," he said, spreading legal documents like poker cards. "Criminal complaint with the state attorney general, federal mail fraud charges, an emergency injunction to freeze her assets. Here's what I'd learned from my contractor licensing classes that most people never realize. Document fraud involving government records isn't just forgery, it's federal crime territory. Every time Vivian used the mail system to send those threatening letters, she committed mail fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1341. Each count carries up to 20 years in prison, and she'd sent dozens of letters across multiple states. But the real beauty was in the evidence chain. Those security cameras had captured everything: midnight trespassing, property damage, illegal surveying. Tommy's financial investigation revealed her entire Ponzi scheme structure, using fraudulent future collections as loan collateral, classic desperation move that would interest both state and federal prosecutors. "She's been living off borrowed money secured by property she doesn't own," Tommy explained, showing us bank documents that reeked of desperation. "If we freeze her assets through litigation, the whole house of cards implodes." Sarah coordinated our media blitz while I reached out to other victims. Margaret Foster, the 78-year-old Vivian had terrorized into hiding, finally agreed to go on camera after we promised protection. Her shaky voice describing Vivian's nursing home threats would melt hearts and enrage juries. Thursday evening, we held our own town hall at the VFW post. The room smelled like decades of cigarettes and spilled beer, but 30 locals packed in anyway. When I presented our evidence, forged signatures from dead commissioners, fabricated digital records, predatory elder targeting, the room erupted. "Nobody signed any damn 1987 covenants," growled Pete Hartman, whose family had ranched here since the 1920s. "We'd remember something like that." Mayor Peterson stood up, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Jake, the town council owes you an apology. We should have investigated before believing her dog and pony show. What do you need?" "Spread the word," I said. "Anyone else gets demands from High Plains Property Management calls me immediately. Don't pay, don't sign, just call." The community response was overwhelming. Local businesses pledged support, the newspaper editor demanded an interview, and even the pastor offered the church as a meeting space. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I belonged here. But while we built our coalition, Vivian was planning her endgame. Tommy's surveillance revealed hired muscle, probably meth heads from the trailer park, patrolling our properties. Worse, she was making frantic calls to banks, trying to accelerate loan collections based on her fraudulent receivables. The gut punch came Saturday morning. Emergency court filings claiming all 4 property owners posed imminent public safety threats, requiring immediate property seizure. The hearing was Monday at 9 a.m. "She's using your military background against you," Bill said, reading the petition with disgust. "Claims you're stockpiling weapons, threatening neighbors, displaying concerning behavior patterns consistent with PTSD episodes." The other victims got similar treatment. Tom painted as a delusional elder, Sarah as an unstable single woman, Margaret as incompetent and requiring protective intervention. 72 hours to expose her fraud before she potentially convinced some overworked judge to hand her everything she'd been trying to steal. That night, sitting on my porch with the team, watching stars emerge over the prairie, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Afghanistan: complete clarity of mission. This wasn't just about my property anymore. It was about protecting every small landowner from predators like Vivian Cross. Sarah looked up from her laptop where she'd been crafting our media strategy. Ready to go nuclear with this? I nodded, thinking about Margaret hiding in her house and every other victim across 3 states. Let's end this woman's career. Sunday morning brought Vivian's most desperate move yet, and the mistake that would destroy her. I was checking my perimeter cameras over coffee, the bitter taste mixing with morning adrenaline when I spotted them. 2 pickup trucks parked on the county road, engines running, exhaust clouds visible in the crisp mountain air. Tommy had already identified the occupants through his network, local muscle for hire with rap sheets longer than my service record. Vivian was burning her last cash reserves on intimidation. The harassment escalated throughout the day with military precision. My internet got accidentally severed by a phantom construction crew. The propane delivery truck couldn't find my address, leaving me with cold showers and colder meals. Someone even called in a gas leak report, bringing emergency crews to tear up my perfectly functional lines. But desperation makes people sloppy. At 3 p.m., Vivian made the call that would end her. Our legal wiretap, properly obtained through Bill's court connections for ongoing criminal investigation, captured her conversation with someone she called Marcus. The audio crackled through Tommy's equipment, crystal clear because she was practically screaming. "No, we can't wait for the hearing." Her voice cut through the static like broken glass. "File the liens Monday morning, all of them, and tell your contact at the assessor's office we need those property valuations tripled by Tuesday. Bribery, conspiracy, witness tampering." She was handing us federal charges on a silver platter. But the next part made my blood freeze. "What about the old woman? Margaret's the weak link. If she testifies Monday, we're finished. Can your boys convince her to take a permanent vacation?" Threatening an elderly witness. Vivian had just escalated from white-collar fraud to violent felony territory. I speed-dialed Tommy. "We need protection for Margaret, now." "Already deployed," he said, his voice tight with professional anger. 2 off-duty deputies watching her place. But Jake, the FBI field office in Billings, just opened official investigation. They want to meet tomorrow at 0800. Sarah's media campaign was meanwhile exploding across the internet. Her preliminary article had 75,000 shares and climbing, with victims from 6 states sharing identical stories in the comments. The hashtag #RuralLandFraud was trending nationally, and CNN had called twice for interviews. Vivian's counterattack was swift and vicious. She'd hired some Denver crisis management firm, probably her final major expense before bankruptcy, to flood social media with professional-looking smears. Suddenly, I was a dangerous veteran with PTSD anger issues who'd threatened an innocent businesswoman protecting community values. They created fake websites with actor testimonials and doctored photos showing my property as some kind of compound. The production quality was impressive and expensive, but midnight brought her biggest mistake yet. My motion sensors triggered as a black Suburban with out-of-state plates pulled into my driveway. 3 men emerged carrying surveying equipment that fooled nobody. Their movement screamed military contractor. These weren't local meth heads. Vivian had imported serious muscle. Tommy's hidden cameras captured everything: faces, plates, audio of their conversation about sending messages and teaching the vet about consequences. One carried bolt cutters, another had a crowbar. The third kept checking what looked like an industrial slingshot loaded with ball bearings. They spent 20 minutes systematically vandalizing my property, cutting fence lines, smashing workshop windows, destroying my mailbox with controlled explosives that lit up the prairie like deadly fireworks. The sound echoed off the mountains, sharp cracks followed by metal ringing against stone. But the surveillance audio captured pure gold, clear threats about what would happen if I kept interfering with Mrs. Cross's legitimate business operations. Interstate conspiracy, destruction of property, criminal intimidation. Vivian's hired thugs were building our federal case one felony at a time. Then one of them poured accelerant around my workshop foundation and flicked a lighter. That's when 20 years of Marine training kicked in. I stepped onto my porch with my legally owned Remington 870 and my command voice that had stopped insurgents in their tracks. "You're surrounded by federal surveillance," I called out, which wasn't technically true yet, but got their attention. "Every face is recorded, we have your plates, and attempted arson carries mandatory minimums. I strongly suggest immediate tactical withdrawal." The lighter went out. 3 hardened criminals scrambled into their Suburban like startled deer and disappeared down my gravel drive, leaving dust clouds and evidence scattered across my property. By dawn, I had county sheriff, state troopers, and federal marshals securing the scene. FBI agents were cataloging evidence while Tommy grinned like he'd won the lottery. Vivian just turned civil fraud into federal racketeering, he said, handing over pristine surveillance footage. These guys connect to similar operations in 4 other states. Sarah arrived with news crews, her excitement barely contained. This is it, Jake. Interstate conspiracy, witness intimidation, attempted arson. She's completely finished. But, as I surveyed my vandalized property, broken glass crunching under my boots while morning sunlight revealed the full damage, one thought dominated. Vivian still had 18 hours before the emergency hearing, and cornered predators are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. Monday morning, 6 a.m. Vivian Cross had vanished, but she'd left behind a ticking time bomb. Her abandoned Escalade sat in the Millbrook Diner parking lot, keys dangling from the ignition, driver's door hanging open like she'd fled mid-bite. The coffee cup was still warm when Sheriff Martinez found it, steam rising in the frigid mountain air like the ghost of her desperation. She rabbited around 4:30 a.m., Tommy said, reviewing diner security footage that showed Vivian climbing into a silver pickup with Nevada plates. But here's the problem. She triggered her scorched earth protocol before leaving. The smell of burned paper and melted plastic hit us when we reached her office. Vivian's employees had spent the night shredding documents, wiping computers, and destroying anything that could implicate them in her fraud. The High Plains Property Management Office looked like a war zone. File cabinets emptied, hard drives hammered to pieces, even the coffee machine destroyed in their panic. But that wasn't the worst part. Agent Rebecca Torres pulled me aside, her face grim. Jake, before she fled, Vivian made some calls. We're tracking communications to similar operations in 6 other states. She didn't just run, she warned her network. My stomach dropped. How many other victims? Conservative estimate? Over 300 properties, probably $15 million in fraudulent claims. And now they're all destroying evidence and fleeing jurisdiction. The scope was staggering. While we'd been focused on our little corner of Montana, Vivian had been part of a nationwide conspiracy targeting rural landowners from coast to coast. Elderly farmers, disabled veterans, recent retirees, anyone isolated enough to fight alone. The emergency hearing at 9 a.m. proceeded without the fleeing plaintiff, but Judge Patricia Hendricks looked like she'd aged 10 years reading our evidence files. The courthouse smelled like old wood and decades of legal battles. But this was something different. Organized crime disguised as property management. Mr. Thornfield, she said from the bench, voice tight with controlled anger. In 30 years on this bench, I've never seen fraud this systematic. All liens filed by High Plains Property Management are dismissed as fraudulent. But the damage to our community's trust? She shook her head. Bill Reeves presented our evidence, like a prosecutor destroying a defense. Forged signatures from dead officials, manipulated digital records, bribery recordings, and surveillance footage of attempted arson. Each revelation hit the courtroom like physical blows. Victory felt hollow when I thought about the human cost. An elderly Wyoming couple had mortgaged their home to pay Vivian's demands. They were facing foreclosure this week. A disabled Idaho veteran had emptied his medical fund, leaving him unable to afford cancer treatments. But Monday afternoon brought the news that restored my faith in justice and revealed Vivian's final mistake. She'd been arrested at a Reno casino, caught on facial recognition software while trying to buy $50,000 in chips with cash. But here's the kicker. In her desperation to disappear, she'd brought documents that connected her to the entire nationwide network. She was carrying a laptop with communications to fraud operations in 12 states, Agent Torres explained, unable to hide her excitement. Names, bank accounts, victim lists, everything. She handed us the biggest rural land fraud case in federal history. The arrests started cascading. Marcus Cross, picked up in California with servers containing original copies of every forged document. The hired muscle from Sunday night, identified through their license plates and facing federal charges in multiple states. By evening, law enforcement was executing warrants from Nevada to North Carolina. But the real satisfaction came from the victims finally getting justice. Margaret Foster called me that afternoon, her shaky voice now strong with relief. Jake, I can sleep in my own house again. For the first time in months, I'm not afraid. Tom Richards stopped by that evening, bringing homemade pie and tears of gratitude. You saved our retirement, he said, his weathered hands shaking as we sat on my porch. We'd have lost everything. The media circus that followed was intense but necessary. Sarah's story had exploded across national networks, bringing attention to rural land fraud that might prevent future victims. My ranch driveway filled with news vans, their diesel engines mixing exhaust with the sweet scent of evening sage. Mr. Thornfield, called out a CBS correspondent, how does it feel knowing your investigation exposed a nationwide conspiracy? I thought about every elderly person terrorized by fake authority, every veteran targeted for their isolation, every family threatened with losing their American dream. It feels like the beginning, I said. There are more predators out there, and now we know how to hunt them. The congressional hearing was confirmed for next month. Federal legislation was being drafted, but as I watched sunset paint the mountains gold, surrounded by reporters documenting the end of Vivian's reign of terror, I realized something important. This fight had given me a new mission, and I was just getting started. 3 weeks later, the Millbrook High School gymnasium had never seen anything like it. Over 500 people packed every seat, with overflow crowds watching on screens in the cafeteria. The smell of old basketball leather mixed with nervous energy and camera equipment as crews from CNN, Fox, and NBC set up their gear. This wasn't just a town hall meeting, it was a national reckoning broadcast live across America. I stood at the podium, looking out at faces that had become family over these brutal months. Margaret Foster sat front row center, no longer the terrified woman hiding in her house, but a fierce warrior who'd driven 12 hours to be here. Tom and Sarah Richards flanked her, their life savings restored through federal asset seizure. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying 20 years of military authority. 3 months ago, a woman in designer boots rolled onto my ranch and tried to steal it with fake paperwork. Tonight, I want to show you how close she came to pulling off the largest rural land fraud in American history. The crowd went silent except for camera shutters clicking like digital rain. My first slide hit the screen, a map of America dotted with 400 red pins, each representing a victim. The visual impact was devastating. 412 properties across 14 states, $23.8 million in fraudulent demands, victims from 19 to 94 years old, all targeted with identical playbooks, fabricated historical documents, forged government records, and systematic terror campaigns. FBI agent Torres stepped forward, her badge catching the gymnasium lights. Mr. Thornfield's investigation didn't just catch one con artist. It dismantled a 5-year criminal enterprise that targeted America's most vulnerable citizens, our elderly, our veterans, our rural families who thought they were alone. The next slide showed mugshots of 15 convicted conspirators, including Vivian's sneering face. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. Then Margaret Foster took the microphone and the room held its breath. "I'm 78 years old," she said, her voice now steel-strong. "I survived the Depression, buried my husband, raised 4 children on land that's been in our family since 1923. But this woman," she pointed at Vivian's photo, "she made me afraid to sleep in my own bed. She threatened to steal everything my family built and throw me in a nursing home if I didn't pay for rules that never existed." Her voice cracked with emotion. But Jake Thornfield gave me something back that I thought was gone forever, my courage. He reminded me that Americans don't bow to bullies, no matter how official their clipboards look. The standing ovation started with the veterans section and exploded across the gymnasium like thunder. 500 people on their feet, applause shaking the rafters, tears streaming down weathered faces. Even the national news crews were clapping. State Attorney General Patricia Newman stepped up next, her prosecutorial voice cutting through the emotion. "Because of evidence gathered by Mr. Thornfield's team, we've secured federal convictions against 15 defendants, recovered $19.4 million in stolen assets, and prevented an estimated $80 million in additional fraud across the western United States." She turned to face the cameras directly. Rural Americans are not easy targets. Predators who hide behind fake authority will be hunted down and prosecuted with the full power of federal law. Congressman Bradley Walsh announced the unanimous passage of the Rural Property Protection Act, legislation requiring federal verification of all historical covenant claims and criminalizing document fraud in county record systems. "We're calling it Jake's Law," he said, "and it's going to protect every rural landowner in America from this kind of predatory fraud." But the moment that electrified the crowd came when Sheriff Martinez stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, appearing via secure video link from Federal Correctional Institution, Nevada, where she's serving 25 years without possibility of parole, Vivian Cross." The screen flickered to life, showing Vivian in orange prison scrubs, her designer arrogance replaced by the hollow stare of someone who'd lost everything. The gymnasium went dead silent, 500 people staring at the woman who'd terrorized their community. "Mrs. Cross," I said, stepping to the microphone, "you're looking at 500 people whose lives you tried to destroy. You're victims. Do you have anything to say?" Vivian stared into the camera with the dead eyes of a sociopath. I was protecting property values and community standards. Someone had to maintain order. Even from federal prison, she was still justifying her crimes. I leaned into the microphone, my voice carrying across the silent gymnasium and into living rooms across America. No, Vivian, you were stealing from people who trusted the system you corrupted. But here's what you never understood. Americans fight back, and when we fight back together, predators like you lose every single time. The roar that followed shook the building's foundation. 500 voices united in victory, justice, and the unbreakable spirit of people who refused to be victims. That was the mic drop moment that ended Vivian Cross forever. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my porch watching the sunrise paint the Rockies gold, and life has never been better. The smell of coffee and bacon drifts from my kitchen where Lisa Martinez, yes, the sheriff's daughter and our town librarian, is making breakfast. Turns out falling in love with someone who helped you research property fraud creates a pretty solid foundation for a relationship. She moved in last month, bringing 2,000 books and the kind of quiet intelligence that makes every day better. Jake, she calls out, Sarah's article about the Pennsylvania case is front page of USA Today. Our little fraud-fighting operation has gone national. The Rural Rights Defense Fund, the nonprofit I started with money from book deals and speaking fees, has helped expose similar scams in 23 states. Last month alone, we prevented $4.2 million in fraudulent collections and sent 12 more predators to federal prison. My ranch has become a headquarters for something I never expected: hope. Every week brings calls from victims across America. Elderly farmers facing fake lien threats, disabled veterans being harassed by phony property management companies, young families terrorized by fraudulent HOA demands. We help them all, free of charge. The irony isn't lost on me. I bought this place to get away from people, and now I spend every day helping them fight back against bullies. Tommy Walsh runs our investigation unit from the converted barn, his military precision perfect for tracking financial crimes across state lines. Bill Reeves handles legal coordination, somehow managing to stay sober enough to file federal complaints that have resulted in 47 convictions and counting. Even Margaret Foster has become part of our team. At 79, she's our best witness coach, teaching other elderly victims how to testify with confidence instead of fear. Bullies count on silence, she tells them. The moment you speak up, they lose their power. The financial impact has been staggering. Federal prosecutors estimate our network has prevented over $200 million in rural land fraud and recovered $78 million for victims. More importantly, we've changed how America protects property rights. Jake's law passed Congress with bipartisan support, requiring federal verification of all historical property covenants and creating criminal penalties for document fraud in county record systems. Every state now has digital security protocols that make Vivian's document forgery impossible. But the real victory is personal. Tom and Sarah Richards just celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary debt-free, their ranch secure for their grandchildren. Margaret Foster donated her family land to the state as a wildlife preserve, ensuring it can never be targeted by future predators. 36 other families have similar happy endings. The community that once viewed me with suspicion has embraced Lisa and me completely. We're planning our wedding for next spring, a small ceremony here on the ranch with the whole town invited. Mayor Peterson is officiating and the VFW is catering. Sometimes the best families are the ones you choose. My workshop is rebuilt, bigger and better, where I teach electrical skills to young veterans transitioning to civilian life. The smell of welding sparks and honest work fills the air most afternoons as we train the next generation of skilled craftsmen. Several have bought their own property nearby, creating a community of people who understand the value of land and independence. The speaking circuit has been surreal. Congressional testimony, veterans conferences, rural advocacy groups, everywhere I go, people share stories of fighting back against petty authority and corrupt systems. The message is always the same. Americans don't surrender to bullies, especially when we stand together. Last week brought the best news yet. Vivian Cross was denied parole after serving only 6 months of her 25-year sentence. Apparently, she'd been running another scam from prison, trying to sell consultation services to fellow inmates facing property disputes. Some people never learn. But here's the thing that keeps me going. Every month brings new cases, new predators targeting vulnerable Americans, rural land fraud, HOA corruption, municipal overreach. The fight never ends, but neither do we. This weekend, we're hosting the first annual Rural Rights Festival here on the ranch, food trucks, live music, educational seminars about property protection, and a scholarship fund for rural kids pursuing legal careers. Expected attendance, 2,000 people from across the Mountain West. As I finish my coffee and watch Lisa tend her garden, she's growing vegetables and herbs that smell like hope itself. I realize I found something I didn't know I was looking for: purpose, community, love, and the knowledge that when good people fight back against corruption, we win every damn time. Comment below and share your own HOA nightmares or property disputes. You're not alone in this fight. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about taking down corrupt systems and fighting for what's right.